The race for the White House is heating up. I know elections are still 17 months away in the United States, but that's America for you. The Republican field is especially crowded. There are daily accusations, a lot of insults, and also some falsehoods. Let me introduce Nikki Haley. She's a US politician of Indian origin, also running for the Republican nomination. And on Monday, she posted this on social media. She says if we want to be serious about saving the environment, we need to confront India and China. They're some of the biggest polluters. Well, in no time, there was backlash. Indian users on Twitter called her out. She was accused of lying about pollution. So let's look at what the reality is. You need to understand that pollution has a time lag. What you emit today affects us years later, maybe 10 or 20 years down the line. This is why experts talk about historical pollution. Don't just look at the current data, also look at the decades before. And what does that data tell us? Since 1850, the US is responsible for 20% of all carbon dioxide emissions. China is second with 11%. Russia is 7% and Brazil 5%. So what about India? India makes up just 3.4% of the total. The rank is 7th. This data tells the real story of pollution. The climate change you see around is because of historical pollution. And who contributed to that? The United States, with a 20% share. Let's also look at another data set. Per capita emissions. It's easy for countries with smaller populations to reduce emissions. Less people, less emissions. So let's consider the per capita data. Qatar leads the list with 37 tons of carbon dioxide. That's 37 tons per citizen. What about the United States? The US emits around 15 tons per capita. And India, just 1.9 tons. Imagine that. America's per capita emission is 7 times higher than India's. Yet, Nikki Haley has the audacity to blame India. Even China is better than the US. Their per capita emission is around 7 tons. Most experts also talk about exported emissions. What does that mean? You keep hearing US officials talk about reducing pollution. They do that by exporting manufacturing. Instead of building factories in the US, they build it elsewhere, like in China or Vietnam, even India. One study found that multinational companies make up 20% of all emissions. Also remember that 1/3 of all MNCs are American. Put 2 and 2 together and what do you get? More pollution by the US. What I just explained isn't new information. It's known to policymakers across the world. In fact, it is recognized in international law. We call it CBDR, Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. Means all countries are responsible for tackling environmental destruction. But there's a catch. They are not equally responsible. Historically, bigger polluters like the US must take the lead. They must spend more. Unfortunately, Nikki Haley missed this memo. Looks like her whole party did. Former President Donald Trump did the same thing. In 2020, he accused India of having filthy air. His words, filthy. It's part of a bigger trend in US politics. You blame and preach to India while running for office, but once in the White House, you change the strategy. You realize India is key to America's interests, and Joe Biden is no different. While running for office, he released a policy paper. It criticized India's Citizen Amendment Act, or the CAA. It also talked about the situation in Kashmir. But cut to 2023, he's a different man. On Monday, a White House spokesman was asked about the health of India's democracy. Listen to the response.
India is a vibrant democracy. Anybody that happens to go to New Delhi can see that for themselves. And certainly, I would expect that the strength and health of democratic institutions will be part of the discussion.
India is a vibrant democracy. Not that America's opinion matters, but at least it's not unsolicited criticism. US politicians must learn to keep politics within their borders. Not like they have a shortage of issues. Gun violence, sky-high medicine costs, abortion rights, inflation. These are all issues that affect American citizens. Maybe discuss those next time. Don't turn other countries into your political punching bags. let's talk about America's friends across the pond. I'm talking about Europe, specifically France. It has a problem with NATO's plans for the Indo-Pacific. The military alliance wants to open an office in Japan. It will be NATO's first outpost in the region. President Emmanuel Macron has a problem with that. He thinks NATO shouldn't go ahead. I have Macron's statement. Listen to what he said. If we push NATO to enlarge the spectrum and the geography, we will make a big mistake. He calls the move to expand a mistake. But why? Macron thinks by expanding NATO will lose its focus. Now this is a problem. If NATO wants an office in Japan, it just cannot go ahead and build one. An expansion like that needs to be put through a vote. The proposal will go to the North Atlantic Council, the highest decision-making body of NATO. All NATO members are represented there. They'll vote on this proposal and their verdict needs to be unanimous. Only then will NATO be able to open an office in Japan. So France will be a stumbling block. Is this proposal unprecedented? Not at all. NATO has a dozen more liaison offices or delegations. They're spread out across the world. There's one in Ukraine too, a country in the middle of a conflict. Most of these offices are small. They help in maintaining ties with the host country's military and government. NATO hasn't formally announced this, but reports say NATO wants something similar in Japan, a small office, one that can help the military alliance stay in touch with Tokyo. The idea is not a new one. NATO and Japan have been considering this since 2007. Now in 2018, Tokyo opened an office in Brussels. Brussels hosts the NATO headquarters. The war in Ukraine has led to deeper ties. Last year, Fumio Kishida was invited for the NATO summit. This year's summit is scheduled for July. Lithuania is hosting the event and the Japanese Prime Minister is invited again. Now earlier this year, the NATO chief was in Tokyo. He had hailed Japan's decision to spend more on its military.
I also told him that I strongly welcome Japan's historic new national security strategy. And I'm glad that Japan is planning to reach the NATO benchmark of 2% of GDP devoted to defense. This demonstrates that Japan takes international security seriously. It makes you an even more powerful partner for peace.
So both sides like each other. Then why is Macron opposed? Maybe because he doesn't want to anger China. Macron is trying to court Beijing. Earlier this year, he traveled to China. It was a high-profile visit. Beijing left no stone unturned for this. It went all out to make Macron feel welcomed. The French president, too, did not disappoint the Chinese. He made all the right noises. In China, Macron spoke out about the Taiwan issue and the larger fight between the US and China. The French president said that Europe should stay away from this conflict. He also thinks the region should not snap economic ties with Beijing. Listen in.
We must not be naive. Our European Union, taking this step of European sovereignty that I defended 5 years ago, is establishing trade defense instruments that are necessary for our credibility. But the European Union must also be voluntarily committed to continuing to have a trade relationship with China.
Well, that sounded a lot like appeasement. US and its allies too saw it that way. They were not happy with Macron's outreach. But the criticism has not affected Macron much. It seems he's still on the same path. That's why perhaps he's pushing NATO to stay away from the Indo-Pacific. But other NATO members have different thoughts. They're deepening their ties with the region. Consider what's happening in New Delhi this week. Defense ministers of leading NATO nations are visiting India. Yesterday, US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was here. He spoke out about NATO's plans for the region.
We are absolutely not trying to establish a NATO in the Indo-Pacific. We continue to work with like-minded countries to ensure that the region remains free and open.
Today, the German defense minister was in New Delhi. There's talk of a submarine deal. Reports say Germany wants to build submarines in India. So one way or another, NATO members are taking more interest in the region. Obviously, regional players like India will set the terms of engagement, but more cooperation is inevitable, whether Macron likes it or not. Now let's look at what's happening in Ukraine. A dam has collapsed. The Nova Kakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine fell earlier today. Millions of cubic meters of water are gushing from the reservoir behind it. About 22,000 people are at risk. 80 settlements are in the danger zone. A mass evacuation drive is currently underway. But why did the dam collapse? Ukraine has blamed Russia. It says Russian forces are trying to hamper Ukraine's counteroffensive. It has even accused Moscow of committing ecocide. Ukraine's allies are going even further. The UK and the EU say Russia has committed a war crime. Russia has given conflicting explanations so far. Initially, a Russian-appointed local governor said nothing had happened to the dam. Then, the governor said Ukraine shelled the structure overnight. Another Russian official says the dam collapsed naturally. While both sides are trading blame, only one thing is certain. The people living in the area are facing a catastrophe. Here's our report. 18 million cubic meters of water. That's the amount of water that was held behind this dam. The Nova Kakhovka Dam on Dnipro River. Earlier today, the dam collapsed. It happened in the early hours of the day. Now there's nothing holding back the water. It has started flowing out. This drone footage shows the force of the water that's being released. Terrifying quantities pouring out every moment. The Nova Kakhovka Dam was the only thing holding it back. It's a Soviet-era dam built in 1956. It was set up to generate electricity. That hydroelectric plant has now been washed away. The reservoir behind the dam provides water to thousands. It's especially important for the people living in Crimea. Now all that water has been broken free, submerging everything in its path. It's not good news for anyone. The river banks are currently occupied by the opposing forces. Ukraine on the western bank, Russia on the east. Both sides will face the wrath. Ukraine has already started evacuations.
Dear residents of Kherson region, Russian army has conducted another terror act. It has exploded Kakhovka Dam. In 5 hours, water level will reach critical level. Evacuation of people to safe areas has started. All services are working. Emergency service, police, military are all together. I urge to take documents and essentials and wait for evacuation buses. Also, I'm addressing the residents of the left bank. Please do everything possible to save your lives and leave the insecure place at once.
So has Russia. It had earlier denied that there was a problem. The Russian-installed governor of Kherson had said the situation wasn't critical, that evacuations weren't needed. But now there's been a U-turn. Russian officials have also sounded the alarm.
The situation in Nova Kakhovka as of 9:15 a.m., water continues to rise. In order to save all lives, the evacuation of the civilians from the border regions affected by the flood is taking place. An operational headquarters has been established. Members of the headquarters, Ministry of Emergency Situations, governor, representatives of the government, they're all at the place and working. There is no panic in the city. At the moment, the water level has risen to 10 meters. Washing away of the dam continues. The maximum rise of the water level could be 12 meters.
At immediate risk are islands on the Dnipro River. Then there are the towns and cities along the river's banks. This includes major cities like Kherson, the capital of the Kherson region, the city Ukraine took back from Russian forces last year. It is already facing the effects of the dam collapse.
Today is the 6th of June 2023. I'm in Kherson. It is 10:30 a.m. After a blast at Kakhovka Dam, water flow in the Dnipro River and its tributaries is very powerful. The water level rose for 1 meter. We'll see what will happen next. but we hope for the better.
So far, no one has taken responsibility for the disaster. Not surprising, Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other. Ukrainian officials put out various tweets blaming Russia for the collapse. Zelensky blamed it on Russian terrorists. One of his advisors said Moscow wanted to create insurmountable obstacles for Kiev's forces. Another termed the act as ecocide, sharing videos claiming to show the extent of the disaster. Russia, in turn, has blamed Ukraine. It has called the dam collapse the work of Ukrainian terrorists. Whoever is behind it, there are going to be dire consequences for the people living nearby. Towns and villages will be inundated. Thousands of homes will be destroyed. Between 16 to 22,000 people will be displaced. We mentioned earlier how the dam supplied water to Crimea. The peninsula may face water shortages now. Then the loss of the hydroelectric plant will strain energy supplies in the region. The reservoir also supplied water to cool the Zaporizhzhia power plant, Europe's largest nuclear plant. It has been under Russian control since the war began. It was already in danger due to attacks. Now it could also face cooling trouble, bringing the region one step closer to a nuclear disaster. But what is already a disaster is the Nova Kakhovka dam collapse. It can reportedly never be repaired. And while Russia and Ukraine indulge in blame game, the brunt of this will be felt by the people in the region for years to come. Now let's talk about football. In Saudi Arabia, Riyadh is betting big on football. The kingdom wants to become a major football hub, and it's been taking a lot of steps in that direction. The latest news is that some clubs will be privatized. This includes big names like this year's top three: Al Ittihad, Al Nassr and Al Hilal. You may know Al Nassr as the club of Portuguese superstar Cristiano Ronaldo. The other clubs are looking to attract top players too. France striker Karim Benzema is on his way to champions Al Ittihad. Al Hilal is desperately trying to woo Argentine legend Lionel Messi. The clubs have been offering extremely lucrative contracts to entice players. All this as part of the Saudi government's Vision 2030. Here's more.
Next season, Saudi Arabian football is getting a new star. French striker Karim Benzema. He's going to ply his trade at Al Ittihad, the current champions of the Saudi Pro League. Benzema will take the field against his former Real Madrid teammate Cristiano Ronaldo. Ronaldo also plays in the Saudi Pro League for the club Al Nassr. He captained the side to a second-place finish in the recently concluded season. But Benzema versus Ronaldo might not be the most exciting prospect next season. There's a possibility of football's greatest rivalry reigniting on Saudi soil. Cristiano Ronaldo versus Lionel Messi. That's right, the Argentine legend may also make his way to Saudi Arabia. He's aggressively being courted by last season's third-ranked club, Al Hilal. And by aggressively, we mean Al Hilal is prepared to break the bank. The latest reports say the Riyadh-based club has offered almost $1.3 billion. $1.3 billion. This is for a 2-year contract. That still means Messi could make over $500 million a year in the Saudi Pro League. His pay would eclipse Ronaldo's, who reportedly makes about $260 million a year. The Portuguese frontman is currently the highest-paid footballer in the world. And if Messi accepts Al Hilal's reported offer, he'll leave Ronaldo far behind. But Ronaldo may not mind. He's been pitching the SPL for a while now.
They're coming big players, big names, young players, old players. They are very welcome because if that happens, the league will improve.
Ronaldo has even talked up the future of the league, how it's heading from humble beginnings towards big things.
To speak about the league, I think the league is very good, but I think we have many opportunities to still grow. And in my opinion, if they continue to do it, the work that they want to do it for the next 5 years, I think the Saudi League can be in the 5th in the world.
He says the Saudi League can be the 5th best league in the world. That's ambitious, but it's what the country is aiming to do. Or rather, what Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is trying to do. The Saudi Crown Prince has a vision. Vision 2030. He wants to diversify the Saudi economy by the end of this decade. From investing in information technology to services, MBS wants to create a vibrant economy, one not solely dependent on oil, and sports is a big part of that vision. Saudi Arabia has invested in Formula One and golf as well, but the biggest sport around the world is football. So now Riyadh is focusing on the beautiful game. Attracting players with absurd pay packages is just one strategy. There's also privatization. Multiple clubs, including last season's top 3, are getting privatized. As the first step, they've been taken over by Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund. It's called the Public Investment Fund. This allows companies and development agencies to invest in and take over the clubs. Once this happens, the clubs are expected to start bringing in money. Riyadh's aim is for the Saudi Pro League's revenue to quadruple by 2030. The goal is for the SPL to make $480 million annually. That's less than what Messi would reportedly make alone. Which proves it isn't about making the SPL profitable, just competitive. The plan seems to be, once these legends retire from Saudi Arabia, they'll leave behind a globally competitive football ecosystem, one that'll eventually, years later, become a pillar of the Saudi economy.
Speaking of Republican candidates, there's trouble brewing for another one. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis. He's being threatened with kidnapping charges. And guess who's behind this threat? California Governor Gavin Newsom. At the heart of this controversy is the issue of migration. DeSantis is anti-migration. If left to him, he would shut the southern US border. To make that point, he has adopted a cruel tactic. He has used private jets to drop migrants in democratic states and cities. He doesn't tell the migrants, he just drops them off. But now, California is pushing back. Does this mean trouble for Ron DeSantis? And just how big is the migrant issue? Our next report tells you.
It's the battle of the governors. Republican Ron DeSantis on one side, Democrat Gavin Newsom on the other. And stuck in the middle are migrants. People from Latin America chasing the American dream. The battle was brewing for a while, but now it's out in the open. Newsom, the governor of California, tweeted this on Monday. Ron DeSantis, you small, pathetic man. This isn't Martha's Vineyard. Kidnapping charges? Before going further, let's get you the backstory. In the last few days, private jets have been dropping migrants in California. The first flight was on Friday. 16 migrants from Colombia and Venezuela landed in Sacramento. The second flight was on Monday. This time, 20 migrants were dropped.
We had no idea that they were coming, but my staff quickly found some of our community folks who work with the immigrant community.
Two questions arise. Where did these migrants board the flight? And who organized them? The first question's answer seems to be Texas. A lot of migrants cross over to the US via Texas. Once there, they seek asylum. The second question is more complicated. Who organized the flight? The migrants carried papers that say Florida was involved. Now, Florida's governor is Ron DeSantis. He's a hardline Republican. He's tough on migration as well. So the belief is DeSantis organized these flights. He used taxpayers' money to charter a plane. It's a cruel joke at the expense of desperate migrants. They had no idea what was happening to them. They were told to board a flight, so they did. And this isn't the first time. DeSantis has done this before. Last year, he flew 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard. It's an affluent liberal island in Massachusetts. Even then, questions were raised. Questions that have popped up again. Gavin Newsom is hinting at kidnapping charges. He says DeSantis is practicing state-sanctioned kidnapping. The next step is proving it. California's Attorney General is on the job. If he can prove that Florida organized the flights, it could mean trouble for DeSantis. But that's just one part of the problem. The larger story is the politicization of migration. It's a highly divisive issue. Republicans accuse Joe Biden of creating a border crisis. They say a migrant tsunami is heading to the US. How big is this tsunami? Tens of thousands of migrants do travel to the US border. Most of them apply for asylum. But numbers aren't the real problem here. Race is. Republican migration policy is pinned on xenophobia. Having said that, Biden isn't exactly faultless. His policies have created a bottleneck at the border. Around 60,000 migrants are waiting in line. Their living conditions are abysmal. It's easy for US leaders to play politics with migrants, but their policies contributed to this. Successive US governments plotted coups in Latin America. They funded drug wars and interventions. The migrants are fleeing the instability caused in some part by the US, so turning them away is not an option. But neither is flying them to California without permission.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with Canada, wildfires are burning in the province of British Columbia. Officials say Canada is on track to witness its worst wildfire season. In Greece, divers are trying to pull out what they call ghost nets from the depths of the Aegean Sea. Thousands of fish have died because of these nets. And in Argentina, a football match turned into a display of fireworks in its final moments. This left the commentators and the audience stunned. And finally, what makes June 6th significant? We're taking you back in history. Today, India marks the 39th anniversary of the Operation Blue Star. On this day in 1984, the Operation Blue Star was carried out to eliminate militants who had taken shelter in the Golden Temple. This happened in the Indian state of Punjab. The operation was ordered by India's then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. She was assassinated later in 1984. We leave you with this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.
No, no se puede creer lo que está ocurriendo ahora en el estadio. No, no se puede creer. Bienvenidos a la Primera Nacional del fútbol argentino, señores.
Pero no terminó.
Y se viene el Deportivo Maipú. Y este es Herrera. 30 segundos finales, centro al área. Le va a quedar la pelota a Paredes. Este es Paredes. ¡Vamos, señores! ¡Ha ganado al Deportivo Maipú aquí en Mendoza! Extraordinaria fiesta.